Hello, hello, and welcome to this edition of the Law Firm Blueprint. I'm one of your hosts, Jay Wayne, and with me, as always, is my man, Seth Price. Seth over there, down in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area with Blue Shark Digital, as well as Price Benowitz. But we are joined by somebody extra special today, our friend and yours, and a legend in this space, Mr. Ken Hardison, who's with us down below. Ken, thank you so much for being with us today to talk all about coaching.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Glad to be here.
So Ken, you've been doing this for a minute. You've been on my radar for almost a decade and a half, and I know that the summit has taken on a life of its own. Really, pretty exceptional what we just came back from in New Orleans, but the thing that seems to have been that sort of been the sort of the glue of PILMMA has been your mastermind group, which if imitation is the greatest form of flattery, you're being flattered a lot because when you started, you may have been the only mastermind, and now it's like everybody's got a mastermind.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about like your perspective. You see under the hood of a ton of law firms, particularly on the injury space. What is it that you think that people are missing? Why is there right now this proliferation of people interested in coaching and masterminds?
Good question, Seth. I think they, well, of course, some people don't even know what they want, but I think a lot of it is they kind of know what they want, but they really don't know how to get there. And the problem is, as you grow, you can't keep doing it the same way. I mean, every time you double after you get up past about 20 or 25 people in your firm, and you go to 50, you got to re-engineer stuff because what worked then will not work now. And the complexity of it, you would think that your overhead would get cheaper as you got, if you went from 2 million to 20 million, you said, oh God, well then, but no, it actually gets higher. And so you really have to watch the bottom line even more carefully and be more efficient when you get bigger than you actually did when you were smaller.
I'm going to come back to that in a second because we talk a lot about that, the mid-level management piece. First is management, but God forbid you get to 50 and you have somebody who's touching people that's not touching you. So we'll come back to that in one moment. But when you look at coaching, I think of it in three buckets. There's sort of seminars where you go and you learn, maybe put the summit in one of those, right? You have masterminds, and then you have one-on-one coaching. And I know you do all three of those. And it seems that each of those has a different place.
Yeah.
But what are your, like, for somebody who just wants to get started in the space, what are your thoughts? Like, where do you go? Because I know for many years I sort of poo-pooed it. I joined masterminds, but the coaching concept, I was like, I couldn't figure out how to bring that in because I felt like, especially in growth mode, there was so much to do that it was almost more trouble than it was worth to bring somebody up to speed as to what you were dealing with. So what is your take? Like, what is the journey that you see people successful with as far as getting themselves involved and getting some help that's not just themselves?
Well, I think it depends on the person. I mean, I think masterminds are really great. Uh, but I think if you want to really accelerate, if you can find somebody that you click with, and that's the big deal. You got to find somebody you feel comfortable with. Uh, I mean, one-on-one coaching is great. Or I became a certified scaling up coach about 4 years ago with Vern Harness's, Rockefeller Habits, which is just a more in-depth EOS deal. It's really built more for firms over 10 million. I think EOS is more for firms under 10 million. But I'm sure I'll have somebody disagree with me. That's fine. But it's just not coaching you. It's actually helping coach some of your people too. Your mid-level management. Like your COO, your CFO, your marketing director. Your leaders on your team. But
And I think to your point, I ironically live this journey, right? I've been a groupie of PILMMA, the original groupie, as some would say, of the PILMMA. But what I found was I come back with crazy ideas, and we got ourselves past 10 million, right? So when we were at 20 million, I felt like a lull. We were sort of like, you have this big team, you have a big infrastructure, and I found that like I was less concerned with myself not that there's not always room to grow and build and want to get better, but that if I could coach up, whether it's through scaling up or EOS or anything, and get the team members raised, that is what got us closer to 30, that the actual empowering of the people.
Yep.
Whereas you can go all the masterminds you want, you come back with great ideas, and they are great ideas, but the only way to actually get the machine to turn is to be able to get somebody working with those people, either in a group or one-on-one.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, for sure. I mean, it's like you said, like I said earlier, it's your job as the leader to own a firm really is to coach up your mid-level leaders, the people underneath you, and make them great leaders. Um, because anybody just off of pure determination and grit can take a firm from 500,000 to 10 million. Really, you can do it. Just once you get past that 10, 15, $20 million, you've got to have really good people, leaders, and your job as the main leader, is to get these, because it's never going to go higher than you, right? What I'm saying is, if you're right here, then they can't get any further up than what you are. So you got to keep growing, but then also you want to grow them up with you. There's a good book, Multipliers. I really like that book. John Maxwell books. I like that. I got certified as a leadership, coach for him with his organization. He writes a lot of good books on it. But really that, and then like Vern Harness says, your number one job is to, coach up other leaders and to make sure that the hiring is done correctly. You've got to have really good executive people. You need A players. If you don't have A players and and the people underneath you right at the first level, it's going to be hard to go from 20 to 30 to 40. I mean, we had that 8-figure group up on the panel the other day at PILMMA, and all of them, great leaders. I mean, if you listen to them, they had really good people underneath them. I mean, they knew how to do it. I mean, that's why they went, some of them are doing 40, 50, 80 million, probably one of them probably doing 100 million. And that's because that they're really good at that.
So one question before I flip back to Jay, as you're growing, there are moments, and you go to PILMMA, you see those people, you're like, everybody's, it's sort of like all the stories you hear, everything's perfect. But one of the things that's humbling is you don't always have all A players, right?
Yeah.
So, and sometimes an A player has issues and is no longer an A player. And sometimes you don't want to spend the money on what really is an A player. I mean, there are a whole bunch of different variations on that. And that's, I think, psychologically one of the tough things to balance, which is, we say you want all A players, but what do you do when you know in your gut somebody is a B player? They're fine, they're moving, and at some point you may need to raise it, but for the next year and a half, 2 years, that's not changing, and you have to get up every day knowing best practice. Ken tells me I need an A player in every seat, but I don't, and that's just the reality that person's there.
Well, you can't get A players in every seat. That's impossible because there's just not enough of them out there. But what I'm saying is, in fact, but I'm talking about people, your executive team.
Right, but even the executive team,
No, you gotta have A players.
But that's a subjective term, right? There's A players, meaning it's humbling because most law firms, just take the finance person, right? A real CFO is about $350,000, right? You don't need a real CFO if you're running a law firm. You're gonna have a controller of some sort, right? And you get, meaning it may be a really good controller, but there are pieces to this where, to me, that's one of those areas that I love the coaching for personally, because I see people that my controller, she's not a CFO, but if I can bring people in, like a fractional CFO, to help coach them up, then at least I'm getting that person from, let's say, what's objectively a B to a B plus, A minus, and and with time an A.
Yeah, and I think CFO would be probably one of the last things I would hire full time.
Of course.
To be honest. But I think one of the first things I would hire full time would be a COO. Once I got to
let's even take that, Ken. A real COO, when you look across the board, that can be like, and again, I say this because this is the issue that I see with firms at 500,000, a million, they need an admin, law firm administrator, a head of ops, whatever you want to call it. But that at some level, you're getting what you pay for. And
Yep.
that when you start off and you're paying 100, that's great. But at some point, you're like, hey, you're paying more and more. And a bunch of those guys on the panel are probably paying between $200,000 and $300,000 for that person. But
Yep.
that's an evolution. And there's a point where, again, one of the biggest challenges I see people facing is you have the person who's gotten you there. And yes, we just said earlier, the person who got you there may not get you to the next level, but that's a pretty big upheaval if that person is in place. And are you going to bring in a true COO over that person, or are you going to coach that person up to be the COO?
Well, I think first you're going to try to coach that person up, but if that don't succeed, then you got to go outside. And here's the way I look about A players. It does take a long time to find them. And the thing you said about paying them, here's what I look at A players. Of course, here's my definition of A player is Patrick Lencioni, which is be humble, but confident, be people smart, which means be able to have some common sense, know how to talk to people, how to deal with people, how to be a teammate, and then be hungry, but not hungry just for money. Be hungry to grow personally and professionally. Have that burning desire to want to be more tomorrow than you are today. If you can find those three traits, and if you miss one of them, it's disaster too. It can be disaster, right? But if you can find those three traits, it's better to pay that person 50% more than you could get a B player, because they're going to make you so much more money and they're going to be so much better if they're truly an A player. And of course, that is subjective, right? I mean, it's not objective. But I think if you looked at it and you put KPIs on them, I mean, I think you can tell real quick whether or not they were an A player. And I think when you're doing $5 million, you can't afford a COO, but there are other things, like you said, firm administrators. I mean, I started out with an office manager. Then I got a firm administrator. Then we went to a COO. I mean, we went, we had to be over 10 million before we started thinking COO. And I think that's, unless you've got the luxury to afford it. I mean, I got one mastermind that there are probably 5-6 million, but they decided to take a plunge and go out and get a COO. And they're having to pay them 150 base plus some incentives. So, if they do good, make over 200. And they won't from the law firm industry, which I don't think you have to be. I think really, I was talking to somebody, and we're actually getting ready to put together, it'll be probably in the fall, but we're going to do a virtual event just on hiring and onboarding, because that's where I see the biggest issues right now. That, and of course, always intake. That'll be.
But couldn't agree more. That's most of our episodes are hitting those two topics.
Yeah, and that's going to be that way forever, because it's always it's like playing golf. You'll never master it.
But I feel like it's getting more and more focused, Jay.
It is. But I'm just saying, but I say screw experience. I'd rather have somebody that's got the A player qualities, or at least has great aptitude and a great attitude. I can teach skills. I can't teach hungry. I can't, as Morgan says, I can't teach attitude. I can't, but I can teach skills. And so that's why I think everybody worried about getting somebody with experience. Screw it. I actually don't want anybody with experience, because they got built in deals that they've done that they don't want to change. And so some of them I think are bad habits, but anyway, that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, some of those people come to you with baggage, and they could be an A player someplace else, but their baggage makes them a B player in your system, and that's not going to be good for your team. So Ken, I got a question for you, and this is something I've been thinking about lately. Lawyers are sort of like the masters of delayed gratification. We go through college, and then you go to law school, and it takes a couple of years to go through law school, and then you got to put cases into suit. It takes a while for these cases to get into suit. But yet, when lawyers start doing something like getting their firm in order, starting to do marketing, it's like they want answers and results immediately, and they rush and make some of these decisions. As somebody who's seen inside hundreds of law firms across the country. Do you find that sometimes lawyers, they jump at things outside of their realm and are moving too fast to
Yeah,
actually be creative and do things the right way because they just see these, they get their eyes are too big for their stomach?
yeah, and it's not just lawyers. It's a lot of business people that are entrepreneurs at heart. I've had that problem over the years. I'm doing a lot better now, but you have to be very conscious. I call it the next shiny object. The deal is you get distracted and whatever, or you're trying to take over the world overnight, and you can grow too fast. You can grow yourself broke if you're not careful because of cash flow, right? I mean, I talked about it at the summit. I mean, you can get by. I mean, you can get by with B players. You can get by, with just okay marketing. But when you run out of cash, man, it's over with. I mean, that's why most businesses fail. They're undercapitalized, right? I'm not just talking about law firms. I'm talking about everybody.
And law firms, as Jay say, don't generally capitalize themselves. They just start up, like present company included.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I started with $2,500. I
Right.
mean, that's what I started with. I remember like it was yesterday, even though it was like 40 years ago,
Yeah.
42. But yeah, I mean, and that takes. I mean, the only way you can grow fast is you have to borrow money, and if you waste it, see, that's what I think. I think lawyers are the worst. PI lawyers are even worse than just regular lawyers. Is that they're not very strategic in thinking things through. What I mean by that is you need to think about, like, before you go and go out. I mean, I had a lawyer. He had a big verdict. I mean, a big settlement, had like 2 or 3 million in cash, and he wanted me to he wanted me to tell him exactly how to spend the money. But he had no systems in place. He had no processes in place, and he didn't have Corvallis. He didn't have any of that set up. He did not even have what I call a differentiator. I mean, what is going to be your message and who is your ideal client? You need to think about all this stuff before you go out and just start throwing money up against the wall like spaghetti and see what sticks and what don't stick. What is your purpose in doing this? Is it branding? Is it to get, is it direct response? I mean, who is your ideal client? What do they eat? What do they watch? What do they read? Where do they go? You know, you know, if you've got this type of accident, where do you, where do they go immediately before, immediately after the incident that makes them need a lawyer, whether it be a trucking accident, a motorcycle accident, it be a brain injury or RSD or a mass tort case. I mean, whatever it is, you need to think about this. I mean, we had one lawyer one time spent over $100,000 on hip replacement ads in North Carolina. It won't me, I promise. And come to find out, they never sold that brand of hip replacements in North Carolina. So that's the kind of thing that I see just blows my mind. But they just assume, what happens when you assume anything, right?
It's also, I think, part of the good and bad. It's been probably an entertaining run. The characters you meet in the PILMMA, universe are amazing, but they're not the average Joes. I mean, it's cowboys, some of whom are a little bit more out there than others. There's some very thoughtful, very smart ones, and there are other ones that are very smart, but they just take crazy risks. And I think that area of law brings that in. If you were risk averse, you would not be in the plaintiff space. You'd be billing hours and know what you're making.
That's right. Yeah, and I think you do have to take some risks to go big, but I think it may be calculated risk. You know what I'm saying? And I think also the more mature your business gets, I think you need to really think about taking really more calculated risk. I mean, the risk needs to be safer risk because listen, I was one of the biggest risk takers in the world in my 30s and early 40s. 50s and 60s, not so much. I still take some risks, but they're a hell of a lot more calculated. I mean, sometimes my wife don't think so, but they really are. I said, you should have seen me 25 years ago. I said, because I knew how to make money, and I'd figure out some way to make it. I've just always been able to, hustle one way or another. And even if I make a mistake, I've lost some money before. I know I could make it back because I know I would never give up, but when you get in your 50s and 60s, I mean, you don't have as much time to make it up, right? I mean, and plus you got a lot more people. The bigger you get, you got a lot more people depending on you, not just your family, but your employees, and you should care about them, right?
Absolutely. So look, hiring, right? I think more important than ever. And I guess with virtual international, it's just become more complex. There are more buttons that you can push. But we touched on something earlier that Jay and I have talked to a bunch of people about, which is it's one thing to get your first management team together, right? You have that org chart that you start out with, and you may be in three places, and now all of a sudden you start to put people in these different slots. But one of the scariest things, and this doesn't apply to some of our sort of, 0 to 1 million people. But as you get bigger, the fact that you're now hiring for people to be direct reports to a manager, not you, who are then managing people. And to me, that's one of those areas that when I sit through a PILMMA mastermind, I know it's sort of unique to the levels of firms that you're touching that, and is a skill set that they don't teach you a lot of this in law school. This seems like the furthest thing because you have to somehow, you went before where the force of nature, whether it be Jay or Ken or myself, that can get you to, as you said, like 10 million. But when you want to actually be able to build beyond you and the people you touch, very often you're left with this idea that it's one more step removed. And that I believe we hear so much talk about culture. That's where, like, whereas before, not that you didn't think about culture, but culture was you. Whatever Jay or Ken was, that was the culture of the firm. And
Yeah.
now it's taking on something bigger than you so that you can emanate that feeling up and down. And I think that was one of the things I was late to the game in figuring out, which was the force of nature that got us to one point, that the hiring and culture sort of come together, because without that, you're just putting butts in seats as opposed to figuring out how to bring a commonality that is a chance of rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, I will say this. I looked at some of the most successful firms and ones I've seen growing the fastest without taking crazy risks are the ones that put a lot of effort into hiring great people and training those people. They really, it's like at the top of their list. You know what I'm saying? And they've got a good culture and they care about their employees and they show it every day. But they really go after the best and they do things that other firms don't. I mean, uh, I can, and I'm not going to call names, but I know I can think of 3 or 4 firms right now that have quadrupled in the last 5, 6 years, and they really put the efforts on that, and it's paid off. I mean, I'm going to tell you, it's paid off.
When you started, because I've been part of the film community for a while, if you just crowdsource names like you see on those pretty things, culture was not something that people were focused on 12 years
No,
ago.
no,
Um,
I used to think it was gobbledygook. I thought it was
Same,
just
and I would see is the guys would have a plaque on their wall of words that they didn't believe in or anything else. What do you, as we reflect back, and I agree with you completely. It is the glue that holds it together. I spent a lot of time with Bill Biggs and others, just focused, on this very simple but difficult concept. What do you think was the turning point? Was it the fact that all of a sudden, before when you started, there are a lot of firms 1 to 5 million, and as some of these $1 to 5 million firms became $10 to 20 million firms, it just became essential that it was no longer that the maniacal CEO screaming and yelling just what was a house of cards, and those guys weren't growing. Like, why has that changed? Because I agree with you completely that at least my perception is fully done a 180 over the last couple of years.
well. I think. I mean, look at PILMMA. 15 years ago, PILMMA, we were lucky if we get anybody even talk to us. I mean, it's this market's got so competitive, PI market in the last 10, 15 years, last 10 years especially. Um, it's so saturated, it's so competitive um, that people are, they're having to look at what is working and what's not working. And what's working is like what I said, I see the firms that are doing the best, and they got a great culture, and they really put a lot of money and time and effort into hiring really good people and raising them up and creating, as Bill Biggs says, lifers. I mean, because I've heard all this stuff about, the young people now, they'll go through 15 jobs in 20 years. Maybe, but I think your A players tend to stay with you if you got a good culture, you treat them right, and they know you care. You take an interest in their personal development. Um, I just think it's more self-awareness, really. And I think the reason people got more aware about it is because competition. You can't do the things the same way over and you see these other guys come in and just blow by you. What
Well,
the hell happened?
Jay's got a great question, which I'd never thought of before.
So, Ken, I want to go back to the concept of an A and a B player. And, as somebody who has coached, like I said, hundreds of lawyers, what do you say to a lawyer when that lawyer either comes to the realization or you come to that realization in your conversation with them that lawyer who's the CEO or whatever you want to call him, that lawyer is the B player. They don't play well with others. They're very headstrong, my way or the highway. And by sheer force, they've grown to a certain level. And they're saying, now I want to keep going. But they're actually the B player in their operation. Maybe they're not as passionate about the subject matter anymore. How do you counsel somebody to either become the A player they used to be, or just, I don't know, what do you do?
Or hire around it so that
or hire around it, but then you poison all the people around you on your leadership team. If you've got a bunch of A's and you're the B, they'll be talking about, how do you deal with that sort of a situation? Because I think that's something that might be happening as people, they become financially secure. Their heart isn't in it so much anymore, but they like the revenue stream. But I mean, I'm thinking to myself as maybe I'm a B player in my office now.
Well, I think it depends on. Listen, I'm a B player on certain things, but that's okay. But are you talking about leadership? Are you talking about management? Or are you talking about? I'm a C when it comes to technology. I'm probably a B minus when it comes to. I can teach management, but as far as managing people, I'm terrible at it because I hate it. I don't have any passion for it. I think I'm a great leader. I think I'm a great idea guy. I'm not a great implementer per se. I can hold people accountable. But when I get somebody like that, I mean, number one, I've got this no asshole rule for my mastermind. So if I think you're that, you're probably not going to get past the front door with me, just to be honest with you. Life's too short. But if I got somebody that turns into that, there's a good book called, was it Crucial Conversations? And I would probably reread that book again and sit down with them and just give them a frank talk and say, listen, I'm not doing this to jump on your bones. I'm doing this to help you. You can't see it, or you're refusing to see it. But if I'm going to continue to work with you, or you're going to continue to be in my mastermind, you're going to have to make some efforts to change. And sometimes they can, and sometimes they can't. I mean, it's really just being honest, but you don't have to be a jerk about it when you talk to somebody. You can be, if you do it sincerely with love and really for their best interest, and they understand that. But if they're so far gone, they're not going to see that. I mean, let's be honest. If you got a narcissistic person, you're wasting your time. I don't waste my time with narcissists. I just get rid of them. Life's too short. Just to be honest with you. But that's sometimes I've had that happen with employees. They were A players, and then something dramatic happened in their life. I'll never forget. Girl had was just spot on. And then her boyfriend broke up with her and moved away. And she just lost it. She couldn't get focused anymore. And all she thought about was him. And I tried to get her some counseling, try to do this, and I fired her. I mean, she went from A to a C. And then some of it they can't help. But I think if you can, usually there's something in their life going on, and sometimes you can help them. I mean, who knows you never know what's going on in people's lives.
Right.
I mean, her husband, somebody might have cancer. They might have a son with a drug problem. I mean, you just don't know. And I think if you go in there and sincerely try to help them, sometimes you can pull them out of it. Sometimes you can't, But here's the bottom line. you, when I'm making decisions, there's two things I look at: my core values. Does it align with my core values? And is it in the best interest of the firm? Not Ken Hardison, the firm. You take those two, I think, guiding lights, you can solve any problem and make any decision very quickly. Um, if you get stuck with a problem like that, go to your core values and look at them. It'll give you the answer. And then ask yourself this question: is it what's in the best interest of the law firm? Might not be in the best interest for me either, personally, but what's in the best interest for the law firm? If you can be brutally honest with yourself and answer that question, I think you can take care of a lot of your issues. You really can.
I love that. I love that. Seth?
No, this is great. Thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate your time. It was it is a crowded space, but
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just amazed at the fact that the summit has become this sort of gathering of top industry minds, and the conversation that go on in the hallways is not to mention the stuff going on the stage is just tremendous. And was there when it was in a under construction Sheraton in Atlanta, and to see you now at the fanciest hotels in the world, pretty cool.
Well, thank you. And it's people like you that made it that way, just to be honest with you. It wasn't me. It's, I've always said you can never get anywhere without help from other people. And if you don't recognize that, you're probably not going to stay there long. Yeah, we've been, and I think one thing that's happened, just to be honest with you, and I tell people like that, they get worried when John Morgan comes into their city. I said, listen, it can actually help you, because he's going to make it so much aware that you can get a lawyer for nothing and do this, and that these kind of cases are worth something. I said, that's what I think is happening in PILMMA. Everybody's out there doing this now, and so people are becoming much more aware that there's stuff out there like it, and they're searching around.
I wonder if this applies to you. I try to say generally, I don't want to sell SEO at Blue Shark. If you want SEO, I'll show you why we think we're the best for you. And I feel like it's sort of, explaining to somebody why they should be in a mastermind. That's not easy. If they want a mastermind, you could say, this is why this group is great, and you have the opportunity to advance over time, and there's a whole community. And so I feel like the competition for you has built a market where people now understand the value of a mastermind. And now the question is, do they want Ken to steer the ship or not?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're definitely right. I mean, it's I think people are seeing the value of it. I saw the value of it 25 years ago because I was in one that had nothing to do with law, and I know it's helped me over the years. And I mean, it just shortcuts it. I mean, like anything else, you get out of it what you put in it, but you got to go home and do something, which that's a whole nother.
That's a whole nother. The next time you're on,
that's no other episode. Yeah.
Very good.
I can say, Ken, I'm not in the PI space at all. I'm in the criminal space, and the times that I've been able to come to a PILMMA event, I can't say that there's another event that I've been to where I've gotten more actionable takeaways that I could tweak a little and apply to my practice than at a PILMMA event. So even if you're not in the PI space, these events have great things that you can then adapt to your own practice, no matter what you're doing. So I highly recommend them. So Ken, thank you so much for being with us today. Of course, folks, if you want to catch us, you can take us on the go by subscribing to the Law Firm Blueprint podcast, and you can catch our show live every week, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific, in the Law Firm Blueprint Facebook group. But that's going to do it for us today. Once again, thank you to our guest, Ken Hardison. Thank you so much for being with us. This has been a great series, and you are on the Mount Rushmore of coaches when it comes to the practice and the business of law. So thank you for being with us. Seth, any final words?
No, just enjoying this series, and thankful Ken made the time to be here.
Yes, thanks again, Ken.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right, folks. That's going to do it for us. Bye for now.